everyone, welcome back to the Equip with Strength podcast. Today I'm joined by Greg Lehman. Did I say that right? Because I've been pronouncing it Lehman.
Yeah, I don't even know. That's
You
what I
just
say,
whatever.
but I'll just go with whatever.
Whatever. Greg is a physiotherapist or physical therapist, depending on where you are in the world. And he's also a clinical educator. The reason why you're here is I saw, you're on my radar anyway, because you and Jonathan have crossed paths and stuff in the past, but I love your whole movement optimism perspective on things, and particularly I've been enjoying your OA optimism series, and so it's on osteoarthritis. The whole point of this podcast is to help increase body trust and increase movement optimism. So I'm hoping that we can achieve something like that today on the topic or wherever it goes. But I am curious to hear more about osteoarthritis, because I know that a lot of my audience may be concerned about that. And these are things that come up in groups, particularly as I was just reading a post today about somebody who got told she had osteoarthritis in her knees and was told she's a powerlifter. She was told no longer to powerlift, no longer to run, and no longer to do anything basically that involves bending the knee. And it's just, I just go
cut it off.
Don't even live anymore. Just sit there. So I'm wondering, I'm trying to think where to even start. I think osteoarthritis, OA, is also called wear and tear arthritis. Can we just start there and just talk about why is it called wear and tear?
So osteoarthritis, the diagnosis right now is obviously you have knee pain. So you gotta have some knee pain. Usually there's like a little bit of swelling. There might be some bony enlargement. So the bones and the joints, they've definitely changed. And then in the morning, like you're stiff, but not for more than 30 minutes. So it kind of warms up. And the reason that's important, because you might have something like rheumatoid arthritis or psoriatic arthritis, or something else going on. So anyways, your knee hurts. And as we age, the structure of our joints will change. Okay. And there is a wearing effect. So like the cartilage can become thinner, the bones can adapt as well. And in some people that predisposes them to pain. So they assume like if you use your knee or you wear it, they'll be tearing. Like it's sort of it'll break down with use. That's the assumption. It's like you're a bridge or some structure, and the more you use it, the more it breaks down. That's sort of the assumption behind our joints as we age. And now, so now there's a debate of so it's acknowledged that for sure there is changes in the joints. What's questionable now is whether it's wear and tear, meaning, is it because you were loading it up throughout your life? And so a number of researchers are probably saying the mechanical influence is pretty negligible. The reason you have these joint changes is because you're a human and like you were born and you're not dead. So like it's just what happens. The same with your face, like we wrinkle and you lose your hair. Like you can't, it's just what happens. There's not much you can do about it. So there might be a tiny mechanical influence, like what you do to the joint, like load wise, but it seems to be it's quite small.
Like the benefits of loading outweigh that tiny issue, are you saying?
Yeah, so that's where I would go. Like I want to be an optimist and say, if you load the joint itself, the cartilage can become stronger and thicker and rejuvenate. And surprisingly, there's actually a little bit of evidence to support that, but even that is negligible. So it's more like exercise is great to help you cope with the normal changes that are going to occur. So it could be like muscular strength or like muscular robustness, or like you change your nervous system, or you change your like outlook and your confidence and your the drug relieving effects you have in your brain. So we probably can't change the joint itself, but we can change like everything around it. Right. That's my take on it.
Would you view osteoarthritis as a disease process?
So we call it that, but what's really exciting is like, say you're 55 and you've been and you have some osteoarthritis and you have some pain, it's not necessarily a progressive disease.
Mm.
Yeah. So I don't know about I think you could call it a disease in some people, but we also know you can have these osteoarthritic changes or changes in the joint and have no pain. So I don't know how, like, is it truly a disease? Like sometimes it is,
Mm.
sometimes it's just great. You have a normal knee that looks different now when you're 45 than it did when you were 20.
Mm. When so kids can have osteoarthritis too, right?
So you'll see changes in the late teens,
Mm. It's
early
interesting.
20s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you won't see, like, you don't, most of the time, like the criteria to be diagnosed with knee osteoarthritis is typically over 50 or 55.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll see, like, there's a famous paper on young tennis players who are under 22,
Mm.
and like 96% of them had changes on their scans, and they called them, I found it ironic, they called them abnormalities, and I'm like, 96% of them had changes. How normal can it be? Like, we need a new definition for what abnormal is. So
Right.
like, so kids can have changes, but doesn't necessarily mean they have the disease or osteoarthritis or anything like that.
Yeah. That's reassuring. Like you could just go through your whole life with something and then like how do people so is the swelling usually the thing that would bring people's attention to it then, or is it pain plus swelling and then they get it checked out and then they get the scan, or is that usually
Yeah.
where it goes?
Pain, swelling, loss of function. And then you don't need the scan to diagnose this, but you'll usually get a scan.
Mm.
And here's the thing, like I do tend to minimize the structure for most people. Like we know you can have these structural changes and you can do well and still live a happy life and have less pain. There are times where the structure is really relevant and people have a lot of pain and it seems to be the driver of pain, and they can respond well sometimes to knee replacements.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important, like we want to recognize that. Don't want to go too strong either direction. But the
Mm.
woman that you mentioned earlier, like there's no reason for her to stop doing the things that she loves.
Right.
Maybe modify them or add something else, but like it makes no sense. It's not going to increase the disease progression. That's for sure. That I would argue that.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people get scared, and a lot of even professionals, like as coaches, you don't want to keep somebody, if the doctor said something, like you're so afraid of like making the person worse,
Yeah.
and the person's afraid that they're going to get worse. So there's all this fear wrapped up and protection of the person and their joint, and like how I guess like because you train a lot of coaches, I'm sure, and also
Yeah.
physios and medical people. Like, how do you and your course is called Reconciling Biomechanics with Pain Science, and kind of think like, how do you help people see that in a different way? I guess there's this narrative of brokenness out there that you're always, you're dysfunctional, you need to get fixed, versus this like
Yeah.
optimistic
You,
narrative that could be trust your body, it's resilient and things like that. Like, is it the language? Is it the beliefs in the practitioners as well?
yes.
All of
And
the stuff.
so yeah, you can give a new meaning and a new explanation that's more optimistic. You can cite research, but that's only part of it. Like, I was put a tweet the other day where I'm at the stage now where people come to see me and they've already read a lot of what I've written or listened to podcasts. So they're primed a little bit, but they still have doubts, and that's totally reasonable because they have to experience it for themselves. This idea that they can trust themselves again, right? And trust their body. So like, um, I would ask people, like the woman you mentioned, like how does weightlifting make you feel? How does running make you feel? Like, what can you tell me? If there was no doctors or no therapists around, what would your experience tell you?
Mm.
Right? Like what do you already know? Right.
Yeah.
So if I'm building a case for resiliency, I'm probably building it with what people have already experienced and just pointing it out to them.
Yeah.
And that's usually what they see, what they'll notice.
Yeah, and there's this sort of loss of trust in yourself, isn't there? Once you hear something like that, it's kind of you become really unsure about what to do next. And even if somebody says you can still exercise, I think I just remember being like this, and a lot of people still hesitate because they're worried that there's a right and wrong way to move. And so even like which exercise is okay and what way am I supposed to do it? And there's this sort of like timidity about it where they're kind of like, still not sure. And then it just ruins the whole joy of movement because they're so worried about something going wrong instead of all the things that go right.
Yep.
That's frustrating.
I'm with you. And that's what you have to do. Like if people, a paper just came out a few months ago. I was talking about it last week. They had the author and then they wanted 4 people to give a take on it. It was a bit contentious, but anyways, they had people with knee osteoarthritis in 3 groups. One group, do you know this one? The Messier paper?
I don't think so. No.
You'll love it. You'll love it. This is right up your alley.
Okay, good.
I like to pick up heavy stuff and put it back down. So for the strength athletes, so they took, I think everyone was over 60, and they all had knee osteoarthritis, so their knees hurt when they did stuff. And one group did heavy resistance training, and I mean heavy. It was 90% of 1 rep max, and 3 to 8 reps, and they were going almost to failure. Like there wasn't a lot left in the tank, and they did that 3 times a week for 18 months.
Wow.
Right. They pushed them. They were pushed hard. The other group did really low, what you would traditionally do, like 40% of their max, not going near failure. They actually matched their volume. That was good as well. And they came in 3 times a week and did the same thing. The third group was an active control, where it's like no specific exercise. I love this. I love the control group actually, but it was like learning about nutrition and about being healthy and learning about the disease. So it wasn't really an inert control. It was good, and it had social support as well. And all 3 groups did okay. There is no difference between the groups. So some people are disappointed because the exercise group didn't outperform like the healthy intervention group, meet a month. So they don't like that. But the positive messaging here is like lots of things can help you with pain, right? Social interaction is huge. So if you already go to a gym or with a running group club or something, keep going. But the other positive messaging is you can load the shit out of your joint. And this is what they did. They followed the people for 18 months and did x-rays throughout. And there wasn't a greater degradation. There was no more wear and tear, like quote unquote, in the heavy resistance group. That's cool. What your friend, client, patient wants to hear. That's the shit right there.
That's what we all want to hear. Like, that's so reassuring. And that's definitely the big thing about that. Because like I've been doing a few of these interviews, and like the worry is just don't want to make it worse. And fair. So they were training in pain then.
So all groups were allowed to poke into pain if you felt comfortable. The idea of training into pain, because they still had pain at the end. There was just a decrease. That's successful. That's the reality of knee OA, when it's that you're probably not going to take it down to 0 for most people, but you can take it down to 2 to 3 out of 10, whatever that means. It's more like, I'm okay with this. It's my knee's sore today, but I'm still doing all the stuff that I want to do.
That to me, that's the most important thing. A lot of people get hung up on not having pain. Like we're so pain averse and risk averse that, people would, I just don't want any pain, but that's not realistic as a human.
No way. Yeah. You just can't. That's where genetics are involved as well. Like some of our I'm predisposed to pain. Like I train around pain all the time. It's fine. My little girls, I guess not a little, but they're gymnasts and cheerleaders, and because they train a lot, so they get heel pain, but we just work around it. They know what to do. They know it doesn't mean anything. They back off and build back up.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because, we have a 3-year-old, and the old me is still in there. The old catastrophizer is still in there and worrier. And I was wondering, like, because I was listening to an episode, I think it was Body Logic Physio podcast, and Peter O'Sullivan was on it. Okay. So he was talking about like how do we even like to spread the good word type of thing, and I was thinking when I was listening to it, like we need to go to schools, like we need to start teaching teachers how to speak about the body differently and PE and all of the things where that stuff is like who has the most contact with their kids. But what got me wondering, like, how do you speak to your kids differently to like about these things? Like do you just kind of, how do you get that balance between wanting to keep them safe, but also like allowing them to like take that risk as well?
It's the same advice for kids as it is for adults, right? We should normalize some aches and pains are okay. When they're acute, like if their foot is really sore and Achilles is swollen, yeah, we back off. We say, oh, this makes sense, sweetie. That's why I talk to my kids. Don't talk to your patients like that. Okay, sweetie. They're all sweeties. Anyway, and we're like, this makes sense. You did a lot. You haven't been running, and now you went right back to the gym, and it's on a hard floor. And at home, you're just on the trampoline. Like your foot's gonna be sore. So what do you think you should do now? And we'll back off. So tell the coach. And every now and then it's funny because like I'll tell the girls that they have to do this, and they'll tell their coach, and I've given them an advice, and the coach, this is why it's so hard to change opinions. The coach kind of disagrees, and they're like, have you seen a doctor? And they're like, no, I talked to my dad, but he's not a doctor. I'm like, do you know who I am? Like it happens all the time.
Oh, I can imagine. Oh,
Yeah, it's the worst, so I just stay out of it. But that's the idea. Like,
right.
You teach them the fundamentals. Like it's the same with everyone. Some pain's okay. We don't want it to get worse. So if it's worse the next day, fine. Something about you made you more sensitive over those few days. Let's back off. You can adapt. You've adapted before. You know how to work around this. Easy.
Yeah. One of the things you actually have talked about in social media is the sensitivity of when you're doing things, you sort of frame it in terms of sensitivities rather than I guess like damage and that sort of pessimistic language. So can you explain a little bit more about that sort of idea?
Yeah, I'm not an academic, right? So this doesn't help you do good science when you use terms like sensitivity. It's pretty nebulous, but what it kind of means is we know that pain is multifactorial. It's influenced by a lot of things. The tissue's one of them. But even how sensitive or how much pain, like you can feel at the tissue, it's driven by all kinds of factors. Like you mentioned worries and fears. Like I'm a catastrophizer. I ruminate. I think about things. That in turn will, whatever is happening at the tissue, you can respond greater to that. So you can feel more pain. But you can even, like this is called neurogenic inflammation. You can, like your nerves can release chemicals down at the level of the joint or the muscle so that the nerve endings become more sensitive, right? So is that like a nervous system thing, or is that a tissue thing? It's like, it's a sensitivity thing. Like you just can feel it more. And then your brain can get hopped up and you're expecting things to be more painful. And then that's self-fulfilling. And I'll tell you one quick anecdote. Everyone says, oh, that's so weird that's, it means psychological. I'm like, well, is this psychological? If you take a runner or a triathlete, and if they take Gatorade and swallow it normally, or Lucozade, I guess if in Europe, like you'll have an insulin and a glucose response in the bloodstream, right? When you swallow it. If you take those same people and just have them put the Gatorade in their mouth and swish it around and spit it out, so it never really goes into their stomach and the bloodstream, they'll have the same response of insulin and glucose being released, right? So is that psychological or is that really a real effect? And that it's the same thing with pain. So that's what I mean by sensitivity. Anything that can like drive your sensitivity. Like when you're sick and if you have a sore shoulder, what do you feel? You feel your shoulder more.
Yeah.
Nothing changed in your shoulder, like structurally.
Right. Yeah.
Your system was cranked up.
And what I find funny is when people when people will say things like, oh, watching that gives me a sore back.
Yeah.
And they're like, or an old injury will flare up just watching somebody else do something that they're like, oh, and they get that sort of that ache and response. What is it like? What are you hoping to, like, what would you love to see happen in, I guess, in, I don't know, like your bubble online, or like what sort of shifts are you hoping to see happen? Like you were just talking before we came on about an article that we both kind of went like, why are people like writing this stuff? So like, obviously that's not the sort of thing you want to see happen, but like, I guess, like, are you seeing anything changing in?
Yeah, you know what? I've been banging literally banging this. No, I'm not literally banging a drum, but I've been saying these things for 20 years.
Oh.
Because I was pretty lucky. I was disabused of a lot of notions when I was in my early 20s. So I've always been pretty skeptical and a simpleton. So I don't know if things are really changing, right? People talk about it, but I'm not, and we are in an echo chamber when you're on social media and all that stuff. So really at the level of the person who's in pain, I don't know if we're seeing a lot of difference out there, population wise. Individual practitioners, sure, they're changing, but helping the world, I think, like globally, I don't know what type of dent we're making.
It's a pity because, but then you kind of look at it like a lot of the engine is driven by an industry that wants to make money from fixing. It's easy to sell some program that you claim to like involve stretching, activation, and that's going to help all your pains. And people, it's so like when you're in pain, that's the sort of thing you go looking for, some structural postural fix that, oh, maybe I'm not activating, or maybe I'm out of balance, or maybe I'm, something. And instead of like, what would be a better kind of message? Like when imagine you had a program to sell to people that would basically, because you use the, is it the bucket analogy?
Yeah, the cup. Yeah.
The cup. So how would you either increase, would it be a case of increasing the cup size? Like the cup size is really bad.
Yeah, I do that. So here, I think, let me like try to rephrase it, but just I want to make sure that I understand your question. So I think, are you asking like, what are all the things that everyone can do to help themselves? Like what are the best things that all of us can do to help with pain?
Yeah.
That's good.
I think just making yourself more resilient, so you're not, so people don't fall into the trap of only looking at their structure and posture and falling into for these programs that may help for a while, but it's not really addressing all of the things that could also be playing into their.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. So
yeah, I'm terrible at questions.
let me no, I know what you're saying. Let me so the cup analogy is pretty simple. Again, it assumes like, we all are a cup or have a cup, and then the things that are in your cup are all the things that might predispose you to having pain.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be structural changes in the tissue, that could be sleeping poorly, that could be stress at work, that could be a genetic predisposition, that could be childhood trauma, it could be any number of things, right? And then, so we assume when that overflows, someone has pain. So treatment is really simplistic here, would be like, you can build a bigger cup or decrease what's in the cup. So building a bigger cup is what you said. That's the idea of like coping and resilience, at its simplest. And so the reason I like the cup analogy, because like what we've done for so long is like blamed people for having pain and said, you have to fix all of these things. Your BMI is 31. Therefore, you're more likely to have pain. You have OA, you don't exercise enough. Your sleep, you only get 6.5 hours per night. And the way I like to be an optimist about it is like, it's really unfair to tell people that, because often they can't change those things. We can't change everything. Yeah, it's great if you can like optimize yourself, but we often can't, right? And so with this model of pain, it's like, you recognize that sometimes there's just going to be shit in your cup and there's nothing you can do about it, but you can cope with it, right? And we see that like BMI is the perfect one, right? Like, yeah, BMI will slightly increase your risk of having knee OA, right? But we also know people can have less pain when they exercise or change their diet and not change their BMI, right? It's still in the cup, but they're doing better. So that would be my message out there. Number one is like, think that there's other things you can do to help with pain. Think the pain is multifactorial. So asking a big question like, how can I be healthier? But then at the same time, giving yourself a bit of a break. Like, you don't have, it can be daunting. You don't have to fix everything, right? You can just do a few things that you want to start doing, and that can go a long way as well. Does that make sense? Are we on the same wave? Okay.
Yeah, that's totally that. you know, and it's interesting, you know, because you brought out the BMI thing, is that's such another thing that people get like a lot of fear over, like that their BMI is making everything like a lot worse. Like they just think that this is the thing, that's because that's what they're told. There's bias against them, and they're told that, you know, it's their fault. And this idea of, and then people use that kind of language about themselves. They say, what did I do wrong? And you know, nothing, didn't do anything
Yeah.
wrong. Like,
Yep.
and it relieves so much of the stress and pressure about trying to, you know, get yourself better, and just that process alone makes you feel better. Like
Mhm.
it's in many times it just lowers the stress about it. Like catastrophizing about it, and ruminating on it is such a big, it has been from my own experience, as well. And you know, you're saying you're probably tend toward that sort of personality too. And it does depend on the personality a lot as well, I think, just how we respond to things. um, so when, have you any more, you know, to stay on that, or do you kind of feel?
Uh, yeah, I would just say like, because going back to one of your questions, like what do we need to do or change? I would say we have too many rules about,
Yes.
you know, what has to happen for people to get better. And that's what bothers me. And I've changed through the years as well. Like, and when you look at the research, you'll often see so many different things helping, and we get a little bit too rigid, or we love our own biases, which you have to exercise to get out of pain. And that's not true, because I know a lot of people don't want to exercise. They just want to like play and I don't frolic. I don't know what that. I'm just thinking, we have a little cat. We have this old cat that walks around the house frolicking. She just plays, and I'm like, she's 15. We're just fostering her
Oh,
until she's going to be adopted. But that's what she still does. She doesn't exercise. She just plays, and I'm like, you don't have to go to a gym if you don't want to. You can just start doing the things that you love again. Or I think if people are like, oh, I want to start a running program, so I got to start doing all this core work and activate my goddamn glutes, and like I got to do all this training first. And I'm like, no, you just start running, like start walking, and then run 10 steps, and then 2 weeks from now run 20. Like it's that simple sometimes. Or like we complicate. There's a paper last year that came out on BMI and number of steps people took. It was all about, oh, if you weigh a lot and you take lots of steps, you're more likely to get knee OA. And I'm like, that wasn't their conclusion. Like you're just handcuffing people. Like someone who might want to lose weight, and then you go and tell them, don't do that or don't walk because they'll have, you know, like, but the paper didn't even support what they said. They just had the conclusion. And I'm not even going to tell you the paper because I want people to read it, but they had this conclusion and they just tortured their results to not even prove it. They just said it. And I'm like, your results don't even prove what you're saying.
Oh my goodness.
Where the number of steps, if you were overweight, yeah, you were more likely to have pain, but the number of steps didn't influence it. Right? So it's not the load on the joint. BMI is has other factors that increase your sensitivity, which is maybe more chemical inflammatory. And I'm guessing just going through, actually I'm not guessing, I'm pretty sure there's a paper on this. I hope so. Or here I am torturing a conclusion out of no results. But the act of trying to lose weight without losing weight is sometimes successful in helping your health. That I know is supported when it comes to knee OA.
That's interesting.
So don't get caught up on what the scale says.
Right, totally.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, it's amazing to me just how we invite, you know, tell people this is great, but there's so many conditions and strings attached. So like any wonder people don't do any, like they get caught up and overwhelmed and more stressed than it needs to be. It's so simple, just start, you know, just do something.
You're deadlifting and you're backgrounded. Oh no.
Right.
I'm
oh
like,
my goodness.
So
I don't know, like I noticed this, like people, I just have a theory that every trainer or fitness person on Instagram is like terrified of having bad form, so they all look so robotic and like have this like perfect form, because when I was doing all that sort of stuff, I was so afraid of being judged as not being good enough as a coach because my form wasn't perfect. And like that just gets you caught up in just being you don't move outside of this particular way. And I kind of wonder why I was so caught in this sort of guarding and protect mode. It was so threatening to not be perfect. And it's so fed to you. Like if you're, I don't know, like even just getting started, you think you have to be like somebody that you're seeing on these sort of videos and whatnot. It's exhausting. And like I was even talking to, it was Sarah Haig, who mentioned about breathing and alignment and, you know, with regards to like diastasis recti, and how mentally it's so exhausting to try to constantly think about, especially when you're like looking after your kids. Like there's just no way you can be perfectly aligned, nor should you want to be. Like
that's it. This permeates it. But the pelvic floor physio is, I like a lot of practitioners, but in some ways it's 10 years behind the optimism route that we're seeing everywhere else. And I've written a lot on that. It always amazes me.
So like regards to the optimism, we've probably already like touched on a lot of this, but you know, how do you kind of define how can somebody move into sort of more of an optimistic, if they're currently very pessimistic about their physical situation, or they're like whether or not they're in pain, maybe they're just afraid of getting started because they're worried that they're going to do it wrong. How can you speak optimistically to that person who's just not quite sure what to do?
So there's two areas here, and most people only talk about the first one. One is this idea that we can adapt to stressors that we place on ourselves, you know, both physical and emotional and all of those things. And so sometimes it's just a question of slowly, say you like to do squats and your knees have always caved in, and that's how you feel strong. But you've been forcing yourself not to, and you push your knees out and that doesn't feel comfortable, but you've been trying to do that because that's what you think you should do. You know, simply would be slowly start doing squats however you feel like it. That's it. You know, like I've started strength training. I don't really like strength training, but I do it because I'm getting older and I want to be healthy when I'm 80 or whatever. I'd rather just trampoline and run and rock climb and stuff like that. But my spine feels, when I squat with the back squat, I feel better when I let it round a little, and I feel stronger. And so I just do that. I just experiment with positions, and I trust myself to slowly adapt. So it's just sort of whatever feels good, you go with that. And then you slowly start doing, like, there's nothing magical here, right? There's nothing at all. This is what I mean. This is so simple. That's what you have to start doing to buy into the optimism. And then the other idea is that when someone tells you like there's a right way to move, people will say, "Oh, Greg, you can't adapt infinitely," and they'll say this is the better way. And I would challenge them and say, it's not always the better way. What people have said for years is often wrong. Don't trust what people have been saying. Like they would say, if you do a deep knee squat, you know, there's more load on the patella. That's not true, right? Because going deeper, you don't always have more load, because there's a wrapping effect. The way the kneecap articulates with the leg bone, it shares the load better, right? Just a change in the angle. So it's what people have often said as being worse for you isn't always right. That's the big thing. And that's hard to know. You have to go read the biomechanics and all this stuff. But so that's my big thing. Like most of the things that people say they're just wrong.
Right.
And you try to find the source, it's just poorly supported.
I think that's the problem, because they seem to have authority in what they're doing, and it's hard for the regular person who just wants to find out how to do things. Or I think even that process itself, I wonder where that idea comes from, where, okay, I want to start exercising, I need to learn how to do squats, and I need to learn how to do all of these things, quote unquote, properly, and put together a proper workout. And like what's the best exercise for such and such, or what's the best way to do. And it just sort of, it feels like it's hard to know that this, a lot of stuff isn't really true.
Yeah.
And that's I guess like that's where when I did my ACSM personal training certification probably about, I don't know, 3 years ago.
Mhm.
And I did like the courses for it a couple of years before that. And even the stuff in that course, like they're supposed to be more of the up to date and evidence based type of things. But I knew that the stuff they were talking about, especially with injury and pain and stuff like that, was not. I was just like, no, like, why are you still teaching this stuff?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like
It's
anterior pelvic tilt and all this stuff. And it's like, oh God, like it's really.
what happens is it's either there's this pressure for researchers to write a paper or a book and to have to say something. So they'll put an opinion out there and say maybe, and they'll couch it with hesitancy, but then it still gets promoted, right? I mean, I saw like a return to run for pregnant women, and they had a screening thing where you had to like do bounding and hops first, and I thought, why do you need to do this screening? Just have them walk and then run. They want to run. They don't want to bound and hop and jump. Right? That's not what they have to do.
Yeah.
But you need to fill the book with all these tests, because it was the section on screening for return to run. Well, here's the screen. Start running. That's it. Like, why do we make it harder? And they're like, well, it can be helpful. I'm like, I definitely know women who can run fine, but if they started jumping on a trampoline or jumping, then they would have an issue. And they're okay with that. They don't want to fix that. They're happy with where they are. I mean, that's not optimal, but their goal is just to run, not to do bounding and hopping and trampolining. That's what I mean. Like things, and now I know, and the authors might know that there's nuance in there, but someone who reads it won't, and then gets promoted, and someone who's more popular promotes it. And suddenly you hear, before you can return to running, you need to be bounding 20 times and doing a drop jump off a step or something. That's what'll happen. And then it gets picked up by the ACSM or any of those groups.
And it's written in stone.
Yeah, it's way too, like people will say not to stretch tendons right now, that stretching is bad for you. And I know who's been saying this for years, and there's literally very little evidence to support that. It just gets said, it gets accepted as dogma. Don't stretch before a run, it makes you weaker. It's not true, but now it's in the BJSM, British Journal of Sports Medicine, and people will say these things. If you want to stretch, go ahead. That's it. It's like we have to have arguments and make ourselves look better by knocking something else down. Yet here I am knocking that down. So I realize what I'm doing there. I am very self-aware. I'm knocking down people knocking down.
Knocking down.
But anyways.
Well, I think it's a fair enough thing to do. It's just you're questioning, like, really, like, and I think that, I think there's some people who listen to this are coaches and things, because, when you're hearing of all of this stuff, it can be very hard to know what to do about that. Like, oh, maybe the things I'm doing and saying, like, so how can coaches, if they don't know whether or not something is true, like how could they change their language even about things, so that they're not like, because I feel like there can be harm in priming somebody to worry that rounding the back, because let me try to form a question. I'm so at one point in the interview, I just don't form questions very well. But so what people hear is different maybe from what the personal trainer means, or the physio means. And so like you're kind of like, you almost have to check in with people, like, what did you hear from what I just said? Like, how do you interpret what I just said there? Because they might hear, oh, keep your back straight, or don't let your back bend, as, when I do that, that's really bad. Even though they never said that, it's inferred.
Yeah, so absolutely do that. And I still give form cues as well. And so if I teach the deadlift, I will say, try not to bend your back, or like keep it stiff. But I do that because the goal is not to keep a straight spine. It's so that they get more of a hip workout. Do you know what I mean? And then I'm like, you're totally fine. I'll say it's totally fine for you to lift stuff up with your spine rounded. But what we're trying to do here is train your glutes and your hamstrings a little bit better. And you're probably a bit stronger in this position. And because you want to improve your jumping or your baseball or soccer, that's why we're training this position.
That's totally
yeah.
different to how probably most people will.
Yeah.
Because they're like, because you might hurt your back, make sure it doesn't round. But totally different. And I would agree with that. Like, I'm probably along the same lines. Like, if they're bending their back a bit, I don't really care. But if you're wanting to focus on this part, then let's do this. Leverage is better, and you're probably going to have a stronger lift if
that's it.
This is what we're going to do. But yes, powerful stuff when you think about like what people take away from the coach's advice. In your course, do you like tell us a little bit about that course? Because if trainers and people would like to explore that, is that something useful for fitness trainers?
Yeah, we often have strength coaches take it and trainers, depending where they are, what they're calling themselves. So it used to dive a lot into manual therapy. Now we don't at all. So, and we don't go into the nitty gritty of diagnoses either, because we don't need to. I think most of that's overrated. So the course is really designed to like simplify a movement and exercise based approach to helping people with pain, and then giving them a better explanation. Like I do a full 2 to 3 hours on like the key messages of pain, which is like messages about recovery, how the body adapts and all those things. So it's just better way to explain the pain problems that people have, and then and then looking at the fundamentals of recovery. Like always asking like, why do people get better? What do we have to do to help people recover? And then there's a big biomechanical area, which gets more into like training and all that. It would be like my favorite lecture is like, when do biomechanics matters? When do they matter? And like sometimes, like I don't care how you lift something safety wise, as long as you're not like just hammering it. You've never lifted something before, but like biomechanics matter if you want to like focus on your hips rather than your spine. You know what I mean? Like, and then so that the debate is, when do we have to make that decision? Right? That type of, so
that's
depends on people's goals.
I would, it's that's a good point. Like, I guess I would probably thought about it, but not quite in that way. Like, at what point do we make that decision? And any sort of without spoiling the spoilers, like any sort of thoughts on that, or is it kind of
for when biomechanics matters?
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
Like here. So if someone has knee osteoarthritis or someone had an ACL repair, biomechanics matters here because actually more with the ACL, if they're returning to a sport, say it's a young girl who's 16 or 17, she wants to go back to playing soccer or rugby or something like that. She's probably going to need specific load on the quadriceps and the hamstring. She can't just do squats, bilateral squats, because the body will protect itself, right? And it'll spare the knee. So she would need like specific quad extensions plus hopping and all the other stuff. So there's like a case where you got to specifically load it. If someone has like a high hamstring tendinopathy, we would think, okay, that hamstring, that tendon probably needs specific load. So again, just doing squats wouldn't be enough. It's not a good hamstring exercise. You need to know, like, you got to get the feet far from the axis of rotation, which is the butt there, to really load up that hamstring. So like knowing when things need to be specific, or if someone just wants like a bigger butt muscle, then you need to know, like, hypertrophy wise, how to not localize it, but just how to focus on that area if that's their goal, if they have physique goals. So that biomechanics would matter there. So it's things like that. Like that's what I think. Or like if someone's sorry, one more. I got a patient tomorrow. Anyways, he just wants to work out, and he thinks I'm going to say like, I can just do whatever. He can just do whatever he wants. I'm like, yeah, but he's also quite concerned about flexing his spine, and he's worried about that. And he's a great guy. So like his exercises, we can do whatever he likes to get fit, but we probably need to start addressing his confidence issue with flexing his spine. So the specific thing we would need there would be like this not even graded, but like this exposure to feared and avoided activities, which would be spine flexion. He doesn't need to do it immediately. We can take 6 weeks where we just do neutral spine stuff and get happy and healthy again, but maybe he needs to confront it. So biomechanics might matter there.
Definitely. Yeah. No, those are great examples. So I guess to wrap up, what would be, I guess, parting words of wisdom from yourself about like either where, people can find you at greglehman.ca, and find more about you either if they're local or whatever, but like you're also on Instagram and you post, you were posting on YouTube for a while, but you're doing more of the Instagram these days, or?
I like to do like the YouTube for big things and think of like a good project, and I'm just doing other stuff now. I'm getting a running course online again, so I'm kind of busy with that. So I'm mostly on Twitter. I do a lot of tweetorials or tweet threads. Instagram is just like my skateboarding and trampolining. That's not with every now and then, every 3 posts are pain and recovery related. The best thing I think I have online for free is my recovery strategies book. It's like 73 pages, and it's redundant. It's all built like every page could be taken out and read, just read that. So if you're a coach, personal trainer working with people, you don't have to give your patients or your clients the whole thing. You would read it and just print off 1 or 2 pages. So and it overlap, or you can read the whole book. But I think that's the best. I wrote that 4 years ago, but I'd hardly change anything. I would just maybe get rid of the typos, but you read something 5 times and they're still in there. Like I would just add a little bit, but so that I think that's the best thing I've ever given away.
And you have is it a course or like a video series on oaoptimism.com?
Yeah, so I forgot about that one. That's that was my like every now and then I try to have like a little project. That was last year at the start of the pandemic. That was OA Optimism. So it's oaoptimism.com, which is just, again, a series of videos that are like 3 to 8 minutes long about pain and recovery, things you can do to help yourself. All of that.
Those are good. Those were good. Anyone who's listening who has like, or you have it, or somebody in your family like are worried about it, like I think that's probably a really good place to go, just to get that. Those videos are really good and address a lot of the concerns that people have.
Yeah, and you asked for like a word of wisdom. Sorry, this would be, if you do have that, this is what I've learned about like exercise and activity and pain is like there's many roads to Rome, right? People think like, oh, I need to see a physio or chiro or someone who's like specifically trained in the right knee exercises. No, this is what's great. Why you can have 20 different trainers who have 20 different styles, and they'll probably, as long as they're doing something for the knee, hip, and foot or the spine, they'll probably all help you. That's what's awesome. That's my words of wisdom. That's what I mean. Like we need more yes and way less no when it comes to like exercise prescription, because so many of the things that we think need to happen to recover don't. That's what I'm learning more and more, which is so surprising. So like lots of things can help. So don't feel like you don't have to be an expert in knee OA, because no one really, they are, but it doesn't make a difference when it comes to movement and activity prescription. It's just do something. Yeah. That's what's so neat. If you're a powerlifting coach, guess what your clients can get to help with their knee pain? Powerlifting. If you do Pilates, guess what will help them? Pilates. Yoga? Guess.
Wow.
There's a theme here.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why this news doesn't spread, because then everyone's little business models would collapse. So this is great news. Thank you for that. So there you are, everyone. Thank you, Greg, for coming on. And so you can, I guess you're on your handle on Twitter is at Greg Lehman.
That's right.
Only that. Okay, great. So thanks to everyone for tuning in today. If you have any questions you'd like addressed or topics you'd like discussed on the next show or something coming up, then you can email me, Marianne, at equipwithstrength.com, and we'll be back soon with more.